means you knew about it because you didn't tear that book out in 1 month, I suspect.
No, but I hate to break it to you, but the crash hadn't happened yet. The economic collapse that I was forecasting is still in our future. That's the subject of my just-released book, The Real Crash, because I'm reminding people that the collapse I forecast hasn't happened. Now, I did forecast what has happened. The bursting of the housing bubble, the financial crisis, the Great Recession, $10 trillion deficits, and, all of this are things that I did predict were going to happen. But that was not my greatest fear. I thought the economy could withstand that. As bad as it would be, as bad as the recession that I forecast would be from those events, that wasn't the crash. What I was afraid of was that this recession was going to be so bad that the government would use record amounts of stimulus to try to artificially revive the economy and reflate the bubbles, that we would end up crashing because of that it was the stimulus that was going to set us up for a real economic collapse, that we would die not from the disease that my book diagnosed, but from the government cure that I was forecasting.
Well, Keynesian economics, it's always a disaster. It always has been. It doesn't make any sense. Break windows, so you hire window glazers. That money's taken out of the economy to put toward windows as opposed to being put in the economy where people actually need it. It's a vicious downward circle. But you talk about, I suggest you're talking about monetizing the debt. Ben Bernanke with QE1, QE2, QE3, going into QE4. Printing money to buy our own debt in order to keep us afloat. But that ends up with Zimbabwean-style inflation.
We don't stay afloat. We end up drowning in the inflation. And instead of resolving our problems, we just exacerbate them because we paper it over. I mean, we need a restructuring in the U.S. economy. And not that the government has to orchestrate it. The government just has to get out of the way and let it happen. But the government won't do that. The government is preventing it from happening with its cheap money by subsidizing all the industries and segments of our economy that need to contract. We're preventing the segments that need to expand from growing. And therefore, we're not going to get any real economic growth. We're not going to raise living standards. We're not going to create productive jobs for our people. We're just going to, stagnate and until we collapse.
Address the concerns from, and I'm certain that there are even many Republicans, the Rhino-esque folks that like control and government expansion and the like, that will make the same argument. But address the concerns of many people who say, well, if you just start cutting government spending and you start curbing this rapacious appetite for taxpayer dollars as well as deficit dollars, you're going to end up creating a bigger problem because all of this, this support that's flowing out of D.C. and keeping people alive and paid is going to disappear, so they're going to they're going to become impoverished and marginalize themselves.
Not at all, because remember, the government doesn't have any money. It has to take it from the private sector in order to spend it. And so when you cut government spending, you simply free up those resources to seek out more productive private sector uses rather than the public sector. Now, yes, there is going to be an immediate consequence. If the government cuts spending on something, then you will see, an immediate reaction. Let's say the government cuts the salaries of government workers. So now government workers have less money to spend, and so, you're going to see an effect of that. But now there's more money in the private sector because it doesn't cost us as much to employ government workers. So where does the money go that used to overpay government workers? It goes someplace else. And so the benefit is seen someplace else. You can't immediately tie it to the spending cuts because it's not as obvious, but it's there. And sometimes you have the pain before you get the gain because the impact of the cut is immediate, whereas the benefit is longer term. It's more substantial. You just have to swallow the bad-tasting medicine, and then the result is you get cured.
Well, and it seems to me that if you just look on Tuesday's election results from California as well as Wisconsin, the people are speaking and doing what many in politics have not had the stomach to do, and trying to curb government and taking the brunt of the fall away from the politicians.
And these are just baby steps in the right direction, but at least it's a move in the right direction. But it really was a battle between the people paying the taxes and the people taking the taxes. It's between the people pulling the wagon and the people riding in it. And the people that were riding in the wagon really tried to get together to try to keep that free ride going. But fortunately, the people pulling the wagon were able to prevail. And, the people in the wagon want everybody pulling it to have to pull harder. Whereas the people pulling the wagon would just assume lighten the load. And I'm in favor of that.
Amen to that. Can you stick around for another break, Peter Schiff?
Absolutely.
We're going to talk to more about the real crash, how to save yourself and your country from America's coming bankruptcy. We'll see if we can't figure out if the status quo is left unchecked, how soon that might be. 8:35. Who's written a brand new book, The Real Crash, How to Save Yourself and Your Country, America's Coming Bankruptcy. Mr. Schiff, I have to ask you this, because quite often I perhaps make the mistake, I want to get your impression on this, of springing from the proposition that people actually want to save the republic, and they want to put us on a responsible spending path so our children will have a country to enjoy rather than chaos and Zimbabwean-style inflation. I was talking to Dick Morris the other day about his book Screwed, and he said, no, you got to understand that a lot of people on the left don't want that. This is kind of by design, and they want it to crash the monetary system in order for the phoenix to arise in some other social form. What do you think about that?
Well, I wouldn't put much stock in what Dick Morris has to say. I think he's been part of the problem himself, and in many ways he supports a lot of big government. But I do agree that politicians are more interested in themselves than their country, and they see their goal is to perpetuate their own reelection. But I happen to,
isn't that just sort of, and this answers my question, which is normally a follow-up question, are they nefarious or stupid? You would argue they're stupid because they fail to appreciate what they're doing by only protecting their own skin for a short period of time.
Is that stupidity, or does it just mean that they're selfish and they're greedy and they're all the things they accuse capitalists of being? That's the greediest people of all are the ones that are in Washington. The problem is they can do a lot of damage with their greed because they have all this power. In the free market, greed is constructive because you have to get your customers to voluntarily, give you their money. But the government can take money against our will, and they do that. And I'm here in Washington, D.C. right now. I'm testifying in about an hour and a half in front of Congress. Congress, believe it or not, is actually deliberating whether or not they should expand their role in the mortgage market by offering additional government guarantees for multifamily mortgages, which is amazing considering all the damage that was already done to the housing market by the government because they guaranteed loans.
Okay.
They want to guarantee even more. They've learned nothing. So, I'm going to dare.
You just confirmed that they're stupid. I mean, that for me, it's like the definition of Einstein's definition of stupidity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. That's just plain dumb.
And all the same special interests that benefited from the subsidies.
Yep.
Are there again arguing that the government needs to do this for the benefit of the economy. When it hurts the economy, it benefits the home builders, it benefits the realtors, the mortgage brokers, but home buyers suffer, and the economy suffers more.
But I would argue even that it doesn't benefit the realtors and the home builders. They get an artificial bump, and then only to have that artificial bump disappear and collapse, and then leaving them without a job. I mean, you need some sort of just stability, It's not, don't prime the pump.
Well, they want another fix of the heroin. They're just so addicted to it. They come to Washington and they say, look, come on, a little bit more. Just give me some more drugs so I can feel good.
They're rubbing their arms, they're itchy and scratching their head. Okay, again, my guest is Peter Schiff, author of The Real Crash, How to Save Yourself and Your Country. I think, obviously, we have a lot of ideas about saving the country, which, of course, means quit spending and quit printing dollars in order to stay afloat. A lot of areas we can curb without sacrificing. How close are we to the inflation actually hitting? I mean, we mentioned QE1 through, it's like Rocky films.
I mean, that's why the cost of living is rising, as fast as it is. That's why real wages are going down. But when you talk about sacrifice, we have to be clear about who we're asking to sacrifice. You see, people who are working in the private sector and who are paying all the taxes, they've already sacrificed. That's what their taxes are.
Right.
If we ask the people who have been feeding off the public trough, if we ask government workers to accept less, if we cut the benefits of government spending, yes, the people who are living off the government, they'll finally have to sacrifice. But the rest of us, we're liberated. So it isn't shared sacrifice, right? The people who have been pulling the wagon get a break. They don't have to pull as hard. It's the people who are riding in the wagon. They might actually have to jump out and help the rest of us.
When will, and I don't disagree with any of that, but when's inflation going to actually kick in? I know we see it in gasoline, but that may be artificially manipulated, of course, because the administration wants very expensive gasoline to perpetuate its nonsensical programs for environment. But when are we going to be at the point where it just hits the fan and it'll just be too late?
Well, I think that's going to be when the dollar really drops on global exchanges. Right now, the dollar is being propped up artificially by concerns over Europe.
Yep.
It's being propped up by Asian central banks who are stockpiling dollars to preserve the export market in the U.S. But, of course, our market is not worth preserving because we're too broke to actually afford their products. The fact that they have to loan us the money to buy their products proves it, and the fact that we can't repay the loans means that they're just giving us the money, so they can't continue this indefinitely. So they're going to wake up, and then all the inflation that we've exported, and that's what we do. We create a lot of inflation, but we don't feel the effects because we export it, and the inflation shows up in China. But eventually, we're gonna import it right back, and you're gonna see prices spiraling out of control in this country at rates never before experienced, and ultimately too, that's going to cause interest rates to move up dramatically, and that's going to be our undoing because the U.S. economy, as overly leveraged as it is, from the top down, the government to average Americans, we can't survive at higher rates. That's why the Fed's got them at zero. Because they know that if they let rates go up, the party is over. This whole phony economy comes collapsing down. Now, the sooner the better as far as I'm concerned, because we got to build a viable one in its place, and the longer we wait, the harder it is.
Amen. Peter Schiff, New York Times best-selling author. I want you to get a copy of his book. You can find it on Brian's Book Club at 55krc.com. There'll be a link to it. There will also be a prize for this week's Brian Book Club, The Real Crash, How to Save Yourself and Your Country. Peter, it's been a pleasure talking today. Thanks for raising the red flag. Somebody's got to do it, and it seems like you've hit the nail on the head before. No doubt you're going to hit it. You're hitting it this time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Look forward to